Later that evening, they hosted a small gathering, the neighbors and friends who'd become their chosen family. Mrs. Kim brought her famous kimchi fried rice. Coach Thompson arrived with his homemade root beer. Alex's coworkers came bearing congratulations cards for his MBA acceptance. As Tom watched his son sharing his news, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about them, he realized something profound. Linda had tried to destroy their family by taking their money, but she failed. Real family, they'd learned, wasn't about shared bank accounts or DNA. It was about the people who showed up when you needed them most. The graduation photos that had once caused so much pain were still in that drawer, but they didn't look at them anymore. Instead, they were making new memories, taking new pictures, writing a different story. Their house had become a home again, not despite Linda's absence, but because of how they'd chosen to fill that void. 1 year after the worst day of their lives, Tom and Alex had rebuilt more than just their finances. They'd rebuilt their trust in people, their faith in the future, and their understanding of what family truly means. The betrayal that was meant to break them had instead revealed their strength, not just as individuals, but as father and son, as neighbors, as friends, as survivors. As the evening wound down and their guests headed home, Alex and Tom stood in their garden, watching the sunset. "You know what, Dad?" Alex said quietly. "I think we're going to be more than okay." Tom nodded, putting his arm around his son's shoulders. The garden needed weeding, the garage needed painting, and tomorrow would bring new challenges. But they would face them together, stronger for having weathered the storm that was meant to destroy them. 1 year after the graduation day that changed everything, Tom stood in the kitchen making coffee. The morning sun streamed through new curtains, casting warm patterns on the freshly painted walls. The house felt different now, lighter somehow, as if they'd finally cleared away the last shadows of betrayal. His phone buzzed with a text from Alex. "Big presentation today. Wish me luck." His son had landed a job at the tech startup downtown 6 months ago, thanks to his old teacher's recommendation. Starting in the quality assurance department, Alex had quickly proven himself and was now leading his first major project. Tom smiled as he texted back a thumbs-up emoji. He remembered how defeated Alex had looked when they first learned about the stolen college fund. But instead of giving up, his son had thrown himself into work, taking online courses at night while working full-time. The graduate school dreams weren't dead, just delayed. Alex was saving money now, building his future on his own terms. The legal battle had finally ended 3 months ago. Jenny, their lawyer, had been relentless in pursuing justice. In the end, they recovered about 40% of their savings, not everything, but enough to start rebuilding. More importantly, Linda and Ray faced consequences for their actions. The fraud charges stuck, and their attempt to flee the country had backfired spectacularly. Tom walked into the living room, where new family photos lined the walls. Pictures of him and Alex at the basketball court, surrounded by the neighborhood kids they coached on weekends. A group shot from Mrs. Kim's holiday party. The whole community at the fundraiser barbecue last summer. These were the memories they chose to keep now. The doorbell rang, probably Mrs. Kim with her weekly delivery of kimchi. But when Tom opened the door, he found a courier holding an envelope. His heart skipped a beat when he saw the return address. It was from Linda's new lawyer. Inside was a letter. Linda was writing to apologize, the lawyer explained. She wanted to make amends. Attached was a cashier's check for part of Alex's stolen college fund. Tom sat heavily in his kitchen chair, staring at the check. A year ago, this would have felt like a victory. Now it just felt empty. He called Alex at work. "Mom sent some money," he said when his son answered. "For your education fund." There was a long pause. "Keep it," Alex said finally. "Put it toward the house. I'm doing okay on my own." His voice was steady, confident. "Actually, Dad, I was going to tell you tonight. I got accepted to the evening MBA program. Starting this fall, I can work and study at the same time." Tom felt tears prick his eyes. "Son, that's fantastic. But are you sure about the money?" "I'm sure," Alex replied. "Mom doesn't get to buy her way back into our lives. We did this without her." After they hung up, Tom walked out to the backyard. The garden they'd planted last spring was thriving, tomatoes ripening on the vine, herbs spreading their fragrance in the morning air. He remembered Linda's perfectly manicured flower beds, how she'd fretted over every wilted petal. That garden was different, a little wild, maybe, but full of life. The wind chimes were gone now, replaced by a simple bird feeder that attracted cardinals and blue jays. The old patio furniture had been swapped for comfortable chairs found at a yard sale. Even the grass was different. They'd let part of it grow into a natural meadow, following Mrs. Kim's suggestion about butterfly gardens. Tom heard a car pull up, Alex coming home early to celebrate his MBA acceptance. These days, his son smiled more easily, laughed more freely. The weight of betrayal had lifted, replaced by hard-won confidence and peace. "Hey, Dad," Alex called out, walking through the gate. He was carrying a paper bag from their favorite diner. "Thought we could have lunch together, and maybe talk about converting the old home office into a study space." They sat in their backyard chairs, sharing sandwiches and making plans. The envelope from Linda's lawyer lay forgotten on the kitchen table. They had stopped letting her actions define their lives. The money she'd taken had been replaced by something more valuable: resilience, community, and an unshakable father-son bond. Alex's college friends organized a job-hunting network, sharing leads and interview tips. "My dad's company is hiring," one texted. "My sister's startup needs programmers," another offered. Their support showed Alex that his future wasn't limited by his mother's actions. Even strangers reached out after hearing their story. A local financial advisor offered free consultations. A counseling center provided sessions at a reduced rate. A real estate agent gave them market analyses and advice about possibly selling the house. One evening, as they sat on their newly repaired front porch, Tom looked around at their transformed home. The fresh paint, the neat garden, the fixed garage door, each repair represented someone who cared enough to help. "You know what Mom never understood?" Alex said suddenly, watching the sunset. She thought family was just about blood and marriage. But look at all these people, they're family too, in their own way. Tom nodded, thinking about the casseroles and job leads, the repairs and fundraisers, the countless small kindnesses that had helped them survive. Linda had tried to destroy their world, but in doing so, she'd shown them just how many people were willing to help rebuild it. A car honked as it passed, the basketball coach heading home from practice. They waved back, part of their new evening routine. The porch light Mrs. Kim had fixed cast a warm glow, and somewhere down the street, children were playing. Their neighborhood hadn't changed, but they saw it differently now, not just as a place to live, but as a community that had caught them when they fell. Word travels fast in small communities. It had been 2 months since graduation day, and the Chen family's story had spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. But instead of the whispered gossip and judgment they'd feared, Tom and Alex found themselves surrounded by unexpected kindness. It started with Mrs. Kim from next door, who still brought dinner every Wednesday without fail. "My mother always said food heals the heart," she'd say, dropping off containers of homemade kimchi and soup, but she did more than just cook. She also introduced Tom to her son-in-law, an accountant who specialized in fraud cases. "Look at these credit card statements," he said one evening, spreading papers across the kitchen table. "There's a pattern here." She made small purchases at expensive stores, then returned them for cash refunds. Classic money laundering technique. He helped them document everything, building a stronger case for their lawyer. The support came from unexpected places. Bob, who ran the local hardware store, heard about their situation and showed up one Saturday morning. "Your gutters need cleaning," he announced, already setting up his ladder. "And that loose shingle on the roof? We're fixing it today." He refused to take any payment, saying gruffly, "That's what neighbors do." Alex's old high school teachers reached out too. His former computer science teacher, Mr. Wilson, called with a job lead. "One of my former students works at a tech startup downtown. They're looking for entry-level developers. I gave them your name." The interview was set for next week, and Mr. Wilson spent hours helping Alex prepare. Even Tom's coworkers stepped up. When they learned about the second mortgage and stolen savings, they organized a fundraiser. "We can't replace everything," his department head said, handing him an envelope, "but we can help keep you afloat while the lawyers do their work." The envelope contained enough to cover 3 mortgage payments. Tom tried to refuse, but his boss wouldn't hear of it. "You've helped every one of us at some point," she reminded him. Let us return the favor. One day, Alex came home to find his old basketball coach, Coach Thompson, fixing their broken garage door opener. "Can't have this sticking in winter," he said, wiping grease from his hands. Besides, I needed someone to talk to. He shared his own story of betrayal and recovery, showing Alex that survival was possible. The local coffee shop where Alex had worked during high school summers created a part-time position for him. "Just until you find something in your field," the owner said. But they both knew it was more than just a job. It was a lifeline, a way to keep busy and earn some money while they rebuilt. Linda's former colleagues from the accounting firm started coming forward. "We noticed things that seemed odd," one of them admitted to Jenny, their lawyer. "Small discrepancies in the books. Extra hours she claimed to work when the office was closed. We should have said something sooner." Their testimony strengthened the legal case, but more importantly, it helped Tom and Alex understand they weren't alone in being fooled. Linda had deceived everyone, not just her family. The neighborhood kids Alex used to tutor in math showed up to help clean the garage, sorting through years of accumulated stuff. They found old photos, holiday decorations, camping gear, memories of better times. "Keep or donate?" they'd ask, holding up each item. Slowly, the garage transformed from a cluttered reminder of their past life into an organized space for their new one. One Sunday, they came home from grocery shopping to find a group of neighbors had repainted their front door and planted new flowers in the garden. The old color was fading, Mrs. Kim explained, but they all knew it was about more than paint. It was about reclaiming their space, making it their own again. Tom's sister Beth drove down for a weekend, armed with new bed linens and kitchen supplies. "Time to replace the old stuff," she declared, helping them pack away anything Linda had picked out. It was therapeutic, watching their house transform piece by piece. The local diner where they used to have family breakfasts every Sunday started saving their favorite booth. "Chen Men's Corner," the waitress would say with a wink, bringing their usual orders without being asked. Those Sunday mornings became their new tradition, a way to start each week with something familiar and comforting. The next day brought more revelations. Jenny's office called with news. They'd discovered Linda had been secretly renting a storage unit. Inside, they found boxes of family documents, photo albums, jewelry, things she'd taken from the house piece by piece over months. "We can add theft to the charges," Jenny explained over the phone. "And the rental agreement shows she started this 6 months before she left. It proves premeditation." The legal terms felt strange when applied to Linda. Premeditation, fraud, criminal charges. This was the woman who'd nursed Alex through chickenpox, who'd spent weekends helping Tom plant their garden, who'd organized neighborhood block parties and hosted holiday dinners. But she was also the woman who'd spent 3 years secretly dismantling their lives, who'd stolen her own son's education fund, who'd left them with nothing but debt and betrayal. "Dad?" Alex's voice pulled Tom from his thoughts. Jenny's assistant called. They found something else. He held up his phone, showing an email. "Mom and Ray bought plane tickets. They're planning to leave the country next month." Tom felt a cold certainty settle over him. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about justice, about making sure Linda couldn't do this to anyone else, about showing Alex that sometimes you had to stand and fight, even when the odds seemed impossible. He picked up his phone and dialed Jenny's number. "Let's go after everything," he said when she answered. "No deals, no compromises. She wanted to tear this family apart. Fine, but she's going to learn that what's left of us is stronger than she thought." The law office was smaller than Tom expected, tucked away on the second floor of a downtown building. Jenny Chen, the lawyer Pete had recommended, sat across from him and Alex, her desk neat but crowded with case files. She adjusted her reading glasses as she reviewed their documents, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. "Well," she said finally, looking up at them, "I won't sugarcoat this. What your wife did goes beyond a simple divorce case. We're looking at financial fraud, forgery, and possibly identity theft." She tapped her pen against a bank statement. These transfers weren't impulsive decisions. They were calculated moves made over months. Tom nodded numbly. He'd spent the last week gathering paperwork, bank statements, credit card bills, property records. Each piece of paper told another story of betrayal. "Can we get any of it back?" Jenny leaned forward slightly. "Some of it, yes. the forged documents for the second mortgage. That's clear fraud. The credit cards opened in your name without your knowledge? We can fight those. But the joint accounts, she shook her head. That's trickier. Legally, she had as much right to that money as you did. Alex, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. What about my college fund? The one from my grandmother? That's actually our strongest case, Jenny replied, pulling out another file. Your grandmother's will specify that money was for educational purposes only. Your mother's use of it for personal expenses violates the terms of the trust. We can definitely go after that. A knock at the door interrupted them. Jenny's assistant poked her head in. Sorry to interrupt, but you need to see this. She handed Jenny a tablet, pointing to something on the screen. Jenny's expression tightened as she read. It seems your wife, Mrs. Chen, has just made an offer through her lawyer. She turned the tablet around to show them. She's offering to return 10% of the savings if you agree not to pursue criminal charges. 10%. Alex stood up so quickly his chair scraped against the floor. She takes everything we have and offers to give back 10%. Tom reached for his son's arm, trying to calm him. What happens if we don't accept? Then we fight, Jenny said simply. It'll be longer, harder, and more expensive. But based on what I'm seeing here, we have a solid case. The problem is, by the time we win, a lot of that money might be gone. The drive home was quiet, both men lost in their thoughts. They stopped at a red light, and Tom noticed they were near Linda's office building. Her car would usually be in the parking lot at this time of day. But of course, she wasn't there anymore. She was in another state, starting her new life with Ray, spending their money. You know what gets me? Alex said suddenly. All those times she talked about saving for the future. Budget meetings at the kitchen table, clipping coupons, making us pack lunches to save money. He stared out the window. Was she laughing at us the whole time? Back home, they'd found more certified letters waiting. Credit card companies demanding payment. The mortgage company asking about the late payment on the second mortgage they hadn't known existed. Bill collectors were starting to call, their numbers filling up Tom's phone screen. Jenny had warned them this would happen. The wheels of justice turn slowly, she'd said. But bill collectors? They move fast. She'd given them a script to follow. Don't admit to any debts. Don't make any payments. Document everything. That evening, Tom sat at the kitchen table with a new stack of papers, forms Jenny had given them to file with the police, the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, and the credit reporting agencies. Each form wanted the same details, dates, amounts, account numbers. Each one required him to write out how his wife of 23 years had systematically destroyed their financial life. Alex came downstairs around midnight, finding his father still at the table. Without a word, he started making coffee. They'd both been sleeping poorly since everything happened, caught in a cycle of anger and disbelief. Look at this, Tom said, pushing a paper across the table. It was an old bank statement from 3 years ago. See these transfers to an account labeled emergency fund? That wasn't our emergency fund. She was setting this up even back then. Alex studied the statement. 3 years? That's when she started her new job, when she met Ray. He poured 2 cups of coffee, adding sugar to his dad's the way he liked it. You think they planned this together? Jenny seems to think so. She found property records showing Ray bought a house in their new state 4 months ago. Paid cash. Tom's hands clenched around his coffee mug. Our cash. Later that evening, they sat on the back porch, the same spot where they'd waited out that first horrible night after graduation. Alex's phone lay silent between them. He'd finally blocked his mom's number after her 6th message of the day. You know what's weird? Alex said, breaking the comfortable silence. I keep thinking about stupid little things, like who's going to make those Christmas cookies she always did, or what happened to that old recipe box of Grandma's. He kicked at a pebble on the porch. It's dumb to care about cookies right now. It's not dumb, Tom replied. Those little things, they're part of who we were as a family. It's okay to miss them. He paused, then added, though between you and me, I think Mrs. Kim's cookies were always better. That startled a genuine laugh out of Alex, the first one Tom had heard since graduation day. It was a small sound, but it felt like hope. Like maybe they could build something new from the ashes of what Linda had burned down. Inside the house, Linda's wind chimes still hummed by the back door, singing their gentle song to the evening breeze. Tomorrow, they'd take them down, box them up with the other memories too painful to look at right now. But tonight, they let the familiar sound wash over them as they sat together, father and son, learning how to be a different kind of family. Alex sat in his childhood bedroom, staring at his phone. Another message from his mom lit up the screen. "I know you're angry, honey, but please try to understand. Sometimes people grow apart. It wasn't anyone's fault." He tossed the phone onto his bed, watching it bounce against the old science fair trophy from 8th grade, the one his mom had helped him win with weeks of preparation and practice. The walls still held photos from happier times, family vacations, birthday parties, his high school graduation. His mom's smile looked genuine in those older pictures. When had that changed? When had she started pretending? He got up and began taking down the frames, stacking them face down on his desk. He couldn't bear to see her face right now, couldn't stand the constant reminder of what their family used to be. Downstairs, he could hear his dad talking on the phone, probably with another relative or friend calling to check on them. The house felt different now, emptier, despite all the casseroles and sympathy cards filling the kitchen counters. Even the familiar creaks of the floorboards seemed wrong somehow. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a long email from his mom, full of explanations and justifications. "I felt stuck in a life that wasn't truly mine," she wrote. "Ray helps me feel alive again, reminds me of who I was before I became just someone's wife and mother." Alex felt bile rise in his throat. Before he became a burden, she meant. Before he tied her down. A knock at his door interrupted his dark thoughts. "Come in, Dad," he called out, quickly wiping his eyes. Tom entered, carrying 2 mugs of hot chocolate, their old comfort drink from when Alex was little. "Thought you might need this," he said, handing one to his son. He noticed the stack of face-down photos but didn't comment on them. "Your Aunt Beth called. She wants us to come stay with her for a while." "I'm not going anywhere," Alex said firmly. "This is our home. Mom doesn't get to chase us out of it too." Tom sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to disturb the phone still displaying Linda's message. "Nobody's chasing us out. Beth's just worried." He took a sip of his hot chocolate, then added quietly, "She also mentioned that your mom called her." Alex's hands tightened around his mug. What did she want? To explain her side of things. Apparently, she told Beth she felt trapped by our expectations, that she lost herself in being a wife and mother. Tom's voice cracked slightly on the last word. Beth didn't know how to respond. "That's funny," Alex said, but his tone was bitter. Mom never seemed trapped when she was planning family vacations or hosting dinner parties. She wasn't lost when she was bragging to her friends about my college acceptance letters. A notification sound made them both jump. Another message from Linda. "I've sent you the login details for your college fund account. I know it's empty now, but I promise I'll make it right someday." Alex laughed, a harsh sound that had nothing to do with humor. "Make it right? She stole my future and thinks she can fix it with promises." He stood up abruptly, pacing the room. "You know what the worst part is? She's acting like she did nothing wrong. Like abandoning your family and stealing their money is just finding yourself or something." Tom watched his son move restlessly around the room, seeing shadows of Linda in his gestures, the way he ran his hand through his hair when upset. It must be hard for Alex, he realized, to see pieces of her in himself. "The university called today," Alex said suddenly, stopping by the window, "about the deferred admission. They said they'd hold my spot for a year, but after that..." He trailed off, staring out at the backyard where he'd spent countless hours playing, while Linda watched from the patio, grading papers or reading books. "We'll figure something out," Tom promised, though he had no idea how. "Maybe we can look into student loans or..." "No," Alex cut him off. "I told you, I'm working first. We need to get stable before taking on more debt." He turned to face his father. "Mom's not going to win this. She doesn't get to ruin both our lives." Tom felt a surge of pride mixed with sadness. His son shouldn't have to be this grown-up yet. Shouldn't have to worry about mortgage payments and job hunting when he should be celebrating his graduation and planning his future. "I'm 52 years old," Tom said quietly, more to himself than to Pete. "I was supposed to retire in 10 years. We were going to travel, maybe buy that cabin up north we always talked about." Pete reached across the table and gripped his friend's shoulder. "You're going to get through this. Both of you are. It'll be hard, but you're not alone." Later that night, Tom sat at the kitchen table with a notepad, making lists. Assets they still had. Bills that needed paying. The equity left in the house. His monthly salary. Alex's potential entry-level income. Numbers that once seemed comfortable now looked impossibly small. In the living room, Alex had fallen asleep on the couch, his laptop still open to job listings. Tom covered him with a blanket, remembering all the times he'd done the same when Alex was small. Back then, he'd been protecting his son from imaginary monsters. Now the monsters were real. They came in the form of bank statements and credit card bills, in dreams deferred and trust betrayed. But as he watched his son sleep, Tom felt something else growing alongside the pain and anger. Determination. They would rebuild. Different dreams, maybe. Harder paths, certainly. But they would rebuild. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window as Tom stared at his laptop screen, his third cup of coffee growing cold beside him. The numbers didn't make sense, no matter how many times he looked at them. Their joint checking account showed a balance of $892.14, just enough to cover the upcoming mortgage payment, as Linda had promised. But their savings account, which had held over 20 years of careful planning, showed zero. Their retirement account was empty. The college fund they'd built for Alex's graduate school dreams had vanished. He clicked through statement after statement, his eyes burning from lack of sleep. Small withdrawals at first, spread over months, 200 here, 500 there. Then larger amounts, carefully timed to avoid suspicion. The pattern was there, clear as day now that he knew to look for it. Linda had been systematically dismantling their financial life while maintaining a perfect facade of normalcy. The sound of the mailbox lid clinking shut made him jump. Outside, the mail carrier was already moving on to the next house. Tom walked to the front door, his legs stiff from sitting too long. Bills, always bills. He sorted through them mechanically until he found one from their credit card company, marked Urgent Notice. Back at the kitchen table, he tore open the envelope. His hands trembled as he read. Charges he didn't recognize, thousands of dollars spent at stores he'd never visited. Linda's name was on their joint card too. Of course she'd used it. The balance was almost at the limit. "Dad?" Alex's voice came from the doorway. He was still in his pajamas despite it being almost noon. Neither of them had been sleeping well. "I've been thinking about graduate school." Tom's heart clenched. They'd had it all planned out. Alex would take a year to work, then start his master's program. The savings had been there, waiting. "Son, I'm not going," Alex cut him off. "I called the university this morning. Told them I need to defer my acceptance." He sat down heavily at the table. "I found some job listings at tech companies downtown. Entry-level stuff, but the pay's decent." Tom pushed away from the table, anger and guilt warring in his chest. "No, we'll figure something out. Your education." "Dad." Alex's voice was firm, grown up. "We both know we can't afford it now, and you need help with the mortgage." He picked up one of the bills from the pile. "Besides, lots of people work for a few years before grad school. It's not the end of the world." But it felt like the end of something. Another dream Linda had stolen from them. The doorbell rang, probably another well-meaning neighbor with a casserole. Instead, Tom opened the door to find Pete, his friend of 15 years who worked at the local bank. His face was grim. "I came as soon as I saw the transfers," Pete said, stepping inside. He carried a thick folder under his arm. "Tom, buddy, you need to know what you're dealing with." They spread the documents across the kitchen table: bank statements, property records, loan applications. Pete pointed to dates and numbers, painting a picture that made Tom's stomach turn. Linda hadn't just taken their savings. She'd taken out a second mortgage on the house 3 months ago, using forged signatures. She'd opened new credit cards in both their names. She'd even borrowed against Tom's life insurance policy. "The good news," Pete said, though his tone suggested otherwise, "is that we can prove fraud on some of these. The bad news is that it'll take time. And money you don't have right now." Alex had been quiet during Pete's explanation, but now he spoke up. "What about my college fund? The one Grandma set up?" Tom's head snapped up. He'd forgotten about that account. a small inheritance from Linda's mother set aside specifically for Alex's education. Surely she wouldn't have. Pete's face said it all. Cleaned out last month. She was listed as a custodian on the account. Tom watched his son absorb this new betrayal, saw the moment it hit him that his own mother had stolen not just from his father, but from him directly. Alex stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Without a word, he walked out the back door. Through the window, Tom could see him pacing in the backyard, running his hands through his hair the way he did when he was trying not to cry. "You need a lawyer," Pete was saying. "A good one. I've got some names." But Tom was barely listening. He was looking at a photo on the refrigerator, their last Christmas together. Linda wearing the expensive watch he'd saved up to buy her, smiling as she held up the airline tickets she'd given him. Tickets for a trip they'd never take, paid for with money she'd already started siphoning away. Tom sat down beside his son, their shoulders touching. The night was cool, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. The wind chimes Linda loved so much played their gentle melody, a sound that had once been comforting but now felt like a mockery. "What do we do now?" Alex asked, suddenly sounding very young again. Tom looked up at the stars, the same ones he and Linda had once watched together on this very porch, planning their future. "We start over," he said finally. "We wake up tomorrow and we start over. Together." Alex nodded slowly, then reached into his pocket and pulled out his graduation tassel. Without a word, he hung it on the porch rail, next to where Linda's wind chimes danced in the breeze. It wasn't the celebration display they'd planned, but somehow it felt right. A reminder that even on the hardest days, there were still achievements worth marking, still moments worth remembering. Father and son sat there until the sky began to lighten, watching their world reshape itself into something new and uncertain. The graduation cupcakes remained untouched in their box on the kitchen counter, their cheerful message now a bittersweet reminder of how quickly joy could turn to pain, and how family could mean something entirely different in the space of a single day. The drive home from the university was silent except for the soft hum of the car's air conditioning. Tom's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles had turned white, while Alex stared out the passenger window, his graduation gown crumpled in his lap. Neither father nor son had touched the box of celebration cupcakes sitting in the backseat, the ones Tom had specially ordered with "Congratulations, Graduate" written in blue frosting. The house looked exactly the same as they'd left it that morning. Tom's gardening tools still leaning against the garage wall, Linda's wind chimes dancing in the afternoon breeze. But everything felt different now, as if they were walking into a stranger's home. Alex pushed open the front door, and they both hesitated at the threshold, suddenly unsure of what to do next. "I'll make some coffee," Tom said, mostly to break the silence. In the kitchen, he noticed little things he'd missed before, the empty spots in the spice rack where Linda's special seasonings had been, the missing coffee mug she'd always used, the bare spot on the counter where her recipe box had sat for 20 years. She'd been removing pieces of herself from their life so gradually that neither of them had noticed. Alex wandered through the house like a ghost, picking up family photos and studying them with new eyes. "Dad," he called out, his voice strange. "Come look at this." In his hands was their family vacation photo from last summer's trip to the beach. "Look at Mom's face. She was already gone, wasn't she?" "We just didn't see it." Tom studied the photo. Linda's smile didn't quite reach her eyes, and she was standing slightly apart from them, as if she was already creating distance. How had he missed these signs? The late nights at the office, the new clothes, the sudden interest in fitness classes, the mysterious phone calls she'd taken in the garage, it all made horrible sense now. The doorbell rang, startling them both. It was Mrs. Kin from next door, holding a casserole dish. "I saw you boys come home early from the graduation," she said, concern evident in her voice. "I thought you might need some dinner." Her eyes darted past them into the house, noticing Linda's absence but politely not mentioning it. "Thank you," Tom managed, accepting the dish. The kindness in her gesture almost broke him. "Would you like to come in for coffee?" Over coffee and Mrs. Kim's kimchi casserole, Tom's phone buzzed repeatedly with notifications. Word was spreading. Friends and family were texting, calling, wanting to know if the rumors were true. Had Linda really left? With Ray from accounting? Had she really taken everything? Alex's phone was equally active, with messages from cousins and friends pouring in. He turned it face down on the table after the fifth call from his Aunt Beth. "I can't deal with everyone right now," he said, pushing away from the table. I need to check something." Tom found him 20 minutes later in Linda's home office, surrounded by scattered papers. "She's been planning this for months," Alex said, holding up bank statements. "Look at these withdrawals, small enough not to raise suspicion, but they add up." And here, he shuffled through more papers. She opened a new credit card last year. The statements went to her work address. The betrayal felt physical now, documented in black and white. Tom sank into Linda's desk chair, the leather still holding the indent of her shape. A sticky note on her computer monitor caught his eye. A phone number with the letters RE next to it, real estate. Even her desk accessories were gone, he realized, except for the family photo she'd kept for appearances. As evening settled in, more neighbors stopped by, each bringing food and awkward sympathy. Tom and Alex accepted their casseroles and condolences mechanically, both too numb to do more than nod and thank them. The kitchen counter slowly filled with pasta bakes and potato salads, enough food to feed them for weeks, as if casseroles could somehow fill the hole Linda had left in their lives. Around midnight, Tom found Alex sitting on the back porch, still in his graduation clothes minus the gown, staring at his phone. "Mom texted," he said without looking up. "She's trying to explain. Says she felt trapped. Says she's sorry about the timing but needed to be honest." He laughed, but it was a hollow sound. Honest. After lying to us for months. Nearby families were starting to notice that something was wrong. A few curious glances were cast their way, and Tom realized they were creating a scene at what should have been a joyous occasion. His son's graduation was being tainted by this moment, forever linked to betrayal and loss. "I have to go now," Linda said, adjusting her purse strap one final time. "Ray is waiting." She took a step back, then another. "Alex, I'll call you tomorrow to explain everything." "Tom, I'm sorry it had to be this way." They watched her walk away across the lawn, her heels sinking slightly into the soft grass with each step. She never looked back, not even once. Around them, other families continued taking photos, laughing, hugging, celebrating. The contrast was almost unbearable. Tom felt a hand on his shoulder and turned to find Alex standing close, his graduation cap clutched tightly in his other hand. The boy, no, the young man, looked lost, his earlier confidence shattered. In that moment, Tom did what fathers do best. He pushed aside his own pain to be strong for his child. "Come here, son," he said, pulling Alex into a hug. They stood there under the warm spring sun, holding onto each other while their world fell apart. The oak tree they'd planned to take photos under cast dappled shadows across them, its ancient branches having witnessed countless family moments, both joyous and heartbreaking, over the years. This was just one more story it would hold in its rings, a tale of endings and beginnings, of betrayal and bonds that couldn't be broken. The spring air was filled with excitement as proud families gathered on the university lawn. The sun shone brightly, making the golden tassels on graduation caps sparkle like tiny stars. Tom Chen sat in the third row of the outdoor ceremony, his heart swelling with pride as he watched his son Alex fidget nervously among his fellow graduates. 22 years of parenthood had led to this moment. His boy was graduating with honors in engineering. Next to him, his wife Linda sat quietly, her face partially hidden behind oversized sunglasses despite the modest cloud cover. She hadn't said much all morning, but Tom had chalked it up to emotion. After all, their only child was graduating. He reached for her hand, but she quickly moved it to adjust her purse strap, something that would later replay in his mind as an obvious sign. The dean's voice boomed through the speakers, reading names as students walked across the stage. Tom couldn't help but remember teaching Alex to walk, those wobbly first steps in their old apartment's living room. Now here he was, striding confidently toward his future. He glanced at Linda again, wanting to share this precious memory, but she was typing something on her phone, her fingers moving quickly across the screen. "Alexander Chen," the dean announced. Tom jumped to his feet, camera ready, his enthusiasm drawing smiles from nearby parents. Alex's walk across the stage was perfect, head high, stride confident, smile bright. Tom caught it all on video, including the moment Alex looked their way and waved. Linda gave a small wave back, but her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. After the ceremony, families spilled onto the lawn like confetti, their chatter and laughter creating a festival atmosphere. Tom spotted Alex making his way through the crowd, still wearing his graduation gown despite the warming day. "Dad. Mom." Alex called out, weaving between proud parents and excited graduates. Tom opened his arms for a hug, patting his son's back perhaps a bit too enthusiastically. "Picture time," Tom announced, waving his camera. "Let's get one by that big oak tree." He pointed to a spot where other families were already gathering for photos. The tree's branches spread wide, providing perfect framing for family shots. That's when Linda cleared her throat. "Before we do that," she said, her voice oddly formal, "I need to tell you both something." She clutched her designer purse, the one Tom had given her for their 20th anniversary, with white-knuckled fingers. Tom felt a chill despite the warm day. There was something in her tone that made his stomach drop, like missing a step in the dark. Alex must have sensed it too, because his celebration-bright smile dimmed slightly. "I've been thinking about this for a long time," Linda continued, her words measured and rehearsed. "I've accepted a position with another company, in another state." She paused, lifting her chin slightly. "And I'm moving there with Ray from the accounting department." The words hung in the air like smoke, poisoning the perfect day. Tom's mind struggled to process what he was hearing. Ray from accounting? The quiet guy who had joined Linda's firm 2 years ago? The one who had come to their house for the office Christmas party just months earlier? "Mom?" Alex's voice cracked, suddenly sounding very young. "What are you talking about?" Linda's next words came out in a rush, as if she needed to get them all out before courage failed her. "I've already arranged everything. The house is in both our names, Tom, so you can keep living there or sell it, your choice. But I've moved our savings to a separate account. I need it for the fresh start." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Tom's vision tunneled, and the happy sounds of the graduation celebration became distant, as if he were underwater. Their savings? All of it? The money they'd set aside for Alex's graduate school? Their retirement fund? The emergency savings they'd built up over 2 decades of careful planning? "Our savings?" he managed to choke out. "All of it. I left enough to cover next month's bills," Linda replied, her tone maddeningly practical. "My lawyer will be in touch about the rest." Alex stepped between them, his graduation gown swishing with the movement. "Mom, this is insane. You can't just. This is my graduation. Why would you do this now?" Linda's composure cracked slightly at their son's words. "I'm sorry about the timing, honey. I truly am. But there's never a good time for something like this, and I couldn't pretend through another family celebration."